Great Grand Rising, everyone. Great Grand Rising, everyone. I'm playing this song here, and it's old school by the Floaters for a reason. And key words in the song is float on. Float on. And tonight we're going to be talking about things that we shouldn't be doing, such as floating by our problems and our difficulties. And we're going to be talking about structural violence tonight. Part two, structural violence and how the genocide and the war against the copper-colored indigenous beings of North America is being affected, how it's perpetrated. We talked about structural abuse the other night. And it's important for us to have an understanding of these kinds of things, because if we don't have these kinds of understandings about what's going on and how it has happened to us, we'll never be able to actually get out of what we're in. And it's very, very important to understand structural abuse, because it's a way of understanding that you don't have any kind of say-so that's happening into your communities under the system, current system that we're in, and the reason why we need to really reestablish ourselves into the system we came out of before 1492. If you haven't done so already, please hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share the video. Please, it's extremely important. Visit www.imindigenous.org. You can find it down there in the link. And buy the book Believe. That book will help us to set forth our tours that are going on to help rebuild our communities. So as we get into this now, I really want to get into the structural violence things. I really want to get into it, because it's extremely important in terms of who and what we are as beings of people, and in terms of what it is. So Johann Goling, I don't know if you ever heard of him, and I'll come up with a few different books. He wrote a book. He wrote several books, actually. One of them was Violence, Peace, and Peace Research. That was Goling. And then another guy by the name of Farmer, he came out with the Anthology of Structural Violence. And he also wrote The Suffering and Structural Violence of Farmer. That was extremely, extremely important books in order for us to be able to understand what's happening with us as beings of people. Now, I know that a lot of people don't understand why they can't get ahead in their communities, why their communities always seem to stay the same, why we always have the same type of education, why it seems like we're always at the bottom rung. Well, this is the reason why we're talking about structural violence today. And structural violence is a term commonly ascribed by Johann Goling, which is introduced in the article Violence, Peace, and Research in 1969. It refers to a form of violence wherein some social structures and social institutions may harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs. And that's exactly what's going on, what's happening to us. And some of these basic needs, it's institutionalized in terms of how we're unable to access what we need in order for us to be able to cure our communities, our families, and even ourselves as individuals. So some of these things that it goes into is institutionalized adultism, ageism, classism, elitism, heterocentrism, nationalism, speciesism. That's interesting, right? Racism, different from speciesism, racism, and sexism are some examples of structural violence as proposed by Goling. And according to him, rather than conveying physical image, structural violence, is a avoidable impairment of the fundamental human needs. Now, again, that's based on his research, and it is avoidable, but it is purposeful because without the structural violence, the main premise of it is to make sure that you're unable to attach anything that's happening to you in your society to any direct cause, person, being, political system, or anything else. Just bad people acting badly. But structural violence, we have to understand, is a part of a system, and not just a cultural system. It's part of a system, right? A political system, which goes into cultural, goes into political, it goes into religious, it goes into education, it goes into the whole entire system and the paradigm upon which how people think to be able to cause the structural violence to occur against or towards certain people. And those certain people that I'm talking about today is strictly the quote-unquote African-American, Black, the copper-colored indigenous beings of North America. And this is the reason why and how we actually got into the situation that we're in right now, because it was a coherent, inclusive, worldwide system that actually came and began to start putting structural violence on us. Structural violence is a term, again, commonly described by Johann Gutling, which has introduced the article Violence, Peace, and Research, a form of violence where some structural and social institutions harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs. And one of the things you have to understand is that your basic needs also goes into healthcare, goes into food, it goes into protection in whatever area that you live in. And this is one of the reasons why, places like Chicago, California, we'll mention Flint, Michigan in a little while, Detroit, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, places in New York are so filled with violence because it is the system is geared for you to turn on yourself because of the outer laying economic, educational, and environmental aspects upon which they put on a certain group of people. And this certain group of people that I'm talking about is the copper-colored indigenous beings of North America, the so-called Black people, African Americans. And just by mentioning the so-called Black people, the so-called African American also goes into structural violence, because structural violence is also psychological. It is an attack, a psychological attack. And a lot of people who have survived through abusive relationships know that the physical abuse is one thing. The psychological abuse is another. And a lot of times the psychological abuse is harder to get over than the physical abuse. So this is the reason why you have to put this all in to structural violence, because it's purposeful to get you into a mindset as to where you feel depleted within your very own society. And that's the purpose of it. Now, structural violence is situated in a way as to where you cannot blame anybody, as I was talking to you before. You can't put your finger on it. Cop goes out and he shoots somebody. Well, it's a bad cop. He's one of the bad cops in a bad system. But you don't blame the politicians. You can't blame the president. You can't blame any individual or specific institution. You can't place your hands on it, because it's just those things that are happening inside of your society. And then it culminates into fear, which is another part of structural violence. Fear, abuse. And these fears and abuse affect your family life. It affects your work life. It affects your social life. It affects your mentality. It affects your very soul and the spiritual energy upon which is being depleted out of your body as well. So the types of structural violence constitutes a violation of human rights. It includes physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, financial, and material abuse, abandonment, neglect, and a serious loss of dignity and respect. And the time frames that these go on, I mean, that's a lot, right? And so when you talk about structural violence and what's happening into your communities and why you can't get them better, this is one of the reasons why. Because it's so encompassing and so mass manipulating that it's very hard for the common person to actually mentally put themselves on it. And great grand rising to all those that are now coming on. Glad to see you there, and peace be with you all. So structural abuse is really it's a very serious thing, and there's a lot of articles written about structural abuse, but there's nothing that's actually relaying the structural abuse to the quote unquote African American community. See, part of structural abuse is when they called you a Negro. When they began to start changing your identity, structural violence incorporates all of that. It's part of structural abuse, but structural violence is also in there because that violence was the attack on your very nature of who you are as a being, a person. That took away your very being. And so when you take away somebody's very being, you strip them of what they really are. And you strip them for so long that after a generation, it takes about 50 years for people to actually lose some consciousness of what they really are. That's an attack. That's a psychological, purposeful attack from a system that is geared to genocide us all, mentally and physically. Hey, the Indigenous one. Peace be with you all. Peace be with you all. I'm glad you guys are here. So you have to understand, so when we talk about structural violence, you don't have to go any further than looking what's happening in your own community. And these things have been happening for years, right? The very way we used to look at our hair. I mean, I want you to pull up some videos from the 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s. Every entertainer that you've seen conked their hair, type of straightening, greased it down so that they can look like their former slave masters or their slave masters in a new identity, under a new identity. That is also structural violence, because what's happening now is that you're changing the very nature of who and what you are because of a society. And what they're trying to do is they try to use the entertainment industry, the sports industry, the movie industry, the songs and poems that we write, jazz and all that other type stuff, to get you in a situation as to where you don't even like the person that you look like. And when we get into our communities and we begin to start teaching people, we begin to start teaching them the very down soul upon which we have inside of us, so it can't come out any other way. So if you're a preacher, I want you to know this, because I'm an ordained minister myself, right? And one of the reasons why I left out of the church, because I didn't like the fact that the church was downing the people all the time. But that is also structural violence, because you can only preach what's inside of your soul and what's been taught to you. And what's been taught to a lot of people is they hate themselves from their hair down to their toes, their nose, their skin. And all of that comes out in the teaching that we do things. So when we go to school, education, and again, part of that structural violence is psychological. Psychological, you have to really talk about your education, right? So when you start hearing things like, African Americans ain't African, I am indigenous, you start hearing that, don't call me black. Your first instincts that's been programmed into you through psychological, through emotional abuse, physical abuse, and a constant hopping on of images to dislike what you're being heard. Because it's hard for you to be able to process what's really going down inside of you. Man, if I told you right now that, they did studies that the Y chromosome in the African-American male is the oldest Y chromosome on Earth, meaning that the African-American female in the mitochondria DNA goes back even further. And if I further told you that they had to develop a whole nother entire tree for the so-called African-American here in the United States, 000, what is it, 000, A00, a whole nother tree, because they cannot put it on the human tree. You would say that I'm insane and crazy, because what you've been told all your life is that you are a certain type of being with a certain type of DNA and a certain type of inferiority. That is structural violence, psychologically, because they strip from you everything that you are and everything that you could ever be, and tell your children and grandchildren and other children that they can ever be. And this is the reason why I call that we went through a period of silence where our grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents really didn't want to talk about all of the things that they had seen in their society and what happened. Because remember, they were actively going through the war, the killings, murderings, the obliteration. So when somebody gets shot out there in the streets, that's structural violence. That's part of a systematic way built into the system to keep you in your place. When they come and they take over your school system after you try to improve it, that is a systematic, structural, violent way of keeping you in your place. It's part of the system. Part of the system. And the violence and structural violence is attributed to specific organizations of the society that injure, harm individuals or mass individuals. And here we're talking about mass individuals, which also goes into individuals. And many structural violence, such as racism, sexism, have become such a common occurrence in society that they appear to be almost invisible. And that's what it's all about. Structural violence is invisible. Structural abuse is invisible. And the reason why it's invisible is because it's been ingrained in the system that we're in. That is not a normal system for the original indigenous being. It's ingrained in it. And it's been ingrained in it so long that, when you hear them call themselves a nigga on the radio and on the music and all that other type stuff, it's normal. All of that is structural abuse. All that is structural violence. It's structural violence geared to tear you down. I was talking to Buck Wylam today, the other day, and we were talking about if somebody came out of their mouth and called a woman a bitch, that person will be beat almost to death. Today, women take being called a bitch some sort of a badge. And the common occurrence of the word nigga is just normal. It's invisible. I don't care what anybody calls me, but the vibrations of your cells, of the water of the cells in your system and your body cares. Because it's all that vibration and all that negative, low energy vibration that is causing us to multiply that. Because you got to remember, the carbon in your system, right, activated by the water cells in our system as well. When you bring in all that negativity and you begin to start saying all that stuff, we're unlike sulfur-based beings, because the carbon and the selenium in your system is generated and geared, is developed to be able to magnify vibrations, and put it out there in the universe. And all those negative vibrations are seeping into our communities, and this is the reason why we're unable to get off the ground. And anytime we seem like we're making any kind of headway, all the negative from the structural abuse, from the structural violence system is causing us to fall backwards, causing us not to be able to do what we're supposed to be doing as beings of people. We are powerful people. But when you're constantly submerged in a system that is geared to destroy you, because we're still at war, there has been no peace treaties for us. There has been, and we don't even want any peace treaties at this point, but that's a whole nother subject. But that the war has never ended against you. You have to remember that the war has never ended against the copper-colored people of North America or of the Americas. Has never ended. And the only way that it's going to end is if you understand what structural abuse is, if you understand what structural violence is, and the reason why we can't get ahead in the system. And then there's all kinds of systems that we have ingrained into our communities to support this structural violence. One of them is the church. I have to say it. Got to be honest. It's the church. Because for a long time, if you remember, the old teachings of the church was that you are a sinner, you were born a sinner, you were born corrupt, you were born as a defect, and you can only be purified through the blood of Jesus Christ. Only. But then when you take a look exactly what that religion has done for us, they are part of a cabal with the Jews, the Muslims, Christians, that created a system of not only structural abuse, but they also incorporated structural violence along with that to destroy the civilizations of North America and everything that it had to it so that they can steal it and take their identity for themselves. For themselves. And that's another part of structural violence. So everybody's looking for solutions, and I know that they are, and we do have solutions, and the solutions are coming. One of them is education, right? One of them is education, right? So we have a lot of brothers out there that are educating. Red Tail, right, from Indeed. We got Buck Wylam and Tomahawk, and those guys over there from African Americans and African. We got Blue Feather. Right, we have a lot of those brothers down there in Memphis, Tennessee, Skyhand, and a lot of those guys down there. Education. We have Correa, Dominique Correa. She's another one who's doing a lot of stuff on there on educating. I mean, there's a whole lot of people that are doing a lot of things surrounding the education, and that education is beginning to start seeping in, but we have to do a little bit better job in getting to the masses, getting to the places where you don't expect really to go. Because I know right now I'm speaking to a lot of people who are, as they say, part of the choir. We have Phoenix Moon, who's out there. She's doing a heck of a job out there reaching people. Tara Sanders, heck of a job. I mean, we have all of the makings to do what we need to do to get over the hump of the structural abuse. But the most important thing I have to say, in order for us to be able to do this, we do have to fix our communities, right? We can't operate as a separate entity, because that's another thing that structural abuse and structural violence, that's what they do. What they do is get you to a point as to where you're at each other's throats because of all of the stress and all of the violence that's going on around you becomes so so not only confused, but so upset and so crazed being in the system that you begin to start turning on each other. Then we don't have any trust. The women don't have any trust for the men because of all the pimping and all that stuff that's been going on. We don't have any trust for any of our people who are trying to lead us in this political system and this system. So this is the reason why we have to redefine the nature of who we are on a real sense as original indigenous beings. And I'm using the word indigenous. I'm going to break down the difference between aboriginal and indigenous. Aboriginal is a broader term that means everyone who is aboriginal on the planet. Everyone. So if you say I'm aboriginal, anybody who's aboriginal can come over here and take your status. Anyone. So I say indigenous because indigenous means that you are indigenous specifically to that particular land that you're on. And then I say original indigenous because there are some fake people out there that took the word indigenous now. So it's okay to call yourself aboriginal in a world sense because we're aboriginals. We are the first beings on the planet. We are specifically indigenous to North America. North America is the oldest continent on the planet. When this continent rose up out of the ground, because we have the oldest rocks on the continent, right? Geologists have already confirmed this. It's been, again, that's part of the structural violence to keep the information away from you so that that way you don't know who you are. And when this continent came up out of the ocean, all the other continents basically weren't here. They're a bunch of pile of rocks. Europe, they said, was just a bunch of pile of rocks and nothing was living on it. And because we know now that our DNA, our Y chromosome, is the oldest Y chromosome on Earth, we know that we were the first ones here in North America. See, they try to say aboriginal, and then you try to say aboriginal, then they try to link you with the Australians that are aboriginal. They try to link you with a whole bunch of other Africans that they consider themselves aboriginal. Aboriginal is a broad term, wide world term for everyone who feels that they've been on this earth from the beginning. We are original indigenous beings here in North America. That's the reason why I use the term original indigenous, because I'm being very, very, very specific to those people who are actually listening to what I'm saying and don't like it. And I really don't care if they don't like it. The heck with them. So as we continue our journey, I want you to understand that we have to understand these terms, right? Structural abuse, because that's what's happening to us right now. They're out there killing you at will. That's structural abuse. They're out there miseducating our children. That's structural and physical violence, structural violence. They're out there giving you a false interpretation of your religion. That's also structural violence wrapped into structural abuse. They're out there giving you all types of videos and disrespecting yourself. That's also all different types of structural violence. Structural violence was made so that it can blend into the background of the society upon which you live in, and you can't tell what's going on and who to blame for it. And when it's on you so much, the people begin to start turning on themselves. And this is the reason why we have so much black violence in our neighborhoods. This is the reason why. So the more education that you can get, and it's not just any old kind of education. Not just any old kind of education. The right education. Allow the carbon in your system to work so that you'll be able to have discernment for you to be able to understand when you're getting the right messages, because that right message is going to really make you feel good, not in a false way, but in a really good, soulful way. And then that spiritual energy will begin to start coming back into you, waking up all of your systems, waking up all your chakra points, allowing that universal energy to flow into you like never before. And this is the reason why we're out there and we're setting up what we call community nations in order for us to be able to facilitate an economic, education, political format for us to be able to represent ourselves, reestablishing ourselves in a format upon which the system we came out of before 1492, before they came. So this is structural abuse. So my advice to everyone is to support anything that is original indigenous that is telling you the truth. Right? That's telling you the truth. And when we go out there on the road, when it is out there on the road, please come see us. So then that way, I mean, we give a very good, more of a detailed explanation about structural abuse and how it is affecting your communities. Because all of this is affecting your communities. That's the reason why the police officers can go out there and shoot you anytime they want. They can come into your homes. Rape your children. I mean, I was down in Mobile, Alabama. I was getting ready to end this one. Just give me a second here, though. I was down in Mobile, Alabama, about back in the 90s. I was working as a for Chase Manhattan Bank down in Mobile, Alabama. And I go down to Mobile, Alabama. This is the first time I've ever been down in the Deep South. First time. And beautiful people down there. Got down there, got off the plane. They picked me up, went down to the guy's house and everything like that. Everything was beautiful. I mean, well, we were eating all kinds of crabs and stuff like that. Everything was pretty good, right? And first time I actually really been down that deep in the South, right? Didn't know anything about it, right? And so one night I was there, second to the third day, second to the last night, we're getting ready to leave. Police officers come into the house. And they start taking the women out of the house. And they took the guy's wife right out of the house. That's where they're going. Oh, they're going to just go hang out with them for a little while. What? Your wife is going to go hang out with these white cops for just a little while? I say, look, man, there's nothing much I can do. I was floored. Didn't know what to say. Didn't know what to say. True story. The girls didn't come back for at least 4 hours. God only knows what they were doing, but for at least 4 hours. And that was well after 12 o'clock. And this is what I'm saying. We have no control, no respect in the political system, no respect in the world political system, no respect in any of your community political systems, no respect at all. All of that is part of structural violence to keep you under wraps. And if anybody else is listening from Europe, because I know the Dark Matter Radio program is listened to in Germany, in Britain, India. If you're listening to all this, these are the kind of things that are happening here in the United States. And it's much worse than what I'm explaining. Because anytime somebody can go out there and shoot you in the head, male or female, anytime they want and get away with it, it leaves you in a situation as to where you're in really bad shape. So this is the reason why, what we're doing here at INA is creating an environment for communities to invite us into your communities. Get us down there so that we can help you set up these little community nations. And in the community nations, what they'll do, it will begin to start helping you to formulate new businesses, new political mentorships. It would help you get you into the new historical councils. It would help you get you into a nationwide Congress. And also being able to build out a new whole entire education system for our people. We cannot allow ourselves anymore in this system to rule us, conquer us, and destroy us. We have to make a determination now to reestablish ourselves as beings of people, original indigenous beings, the true aboriginals of the earth, and reestablish the system that we came out of, and then protect our people and raise up real leaders. Anybody out there calling themselves a leader now, they're fooling you, because a leader is a person who can protect themselves. They ain't nothing but a shyster. So I want to be able to get us, we want to be able to get us into a position as to where we're able to protect ourselves for real. This is why understanding structural violence, structural abuse is extremely important. And I really do appreciate everyone being here today. Really, really do. And I want to say that I am so thankful and blessed being in the situation that I am right now to be able to help restore our people to who and what they are, and to work with all these great people that I mentioned on this show today. So I started off with Float On. I'm going to end with that. And because, there's a lot of people out there that's floating. Just floating. But they just killed my neighbor. I'm just floating. I ain't going to say nothing. I don't want no trouble. I'm just comfortable. So we just got to keep floating on. But if we keep floating on, and not wanting any kind of problems or anything else like that, what's going to happen to our people? What's going to happen to our children, our women? Do you know that if a black person has a heart attack in the United States, they are most likely not to receive any of the medical services to be able to keep them alive? Do you know that our baby mortality rate is the lowest in the country? I just watched a video today. Somebody sent me a report about the immigration centers and how all these Democrats are running around the place saying how all these people are being abused in these immigration centers. It's another structural abuse and structural violence that's going on with people's minds. She got in there, showed the video, and these places are immaculate. She said they're better than all the schools she ever went to as a kid. They're lying. They lied about who you are. They lied about your background. They lied about your history. They told you that when Columbus came here, everybody was dead and they just walked onto these lands. They lied about everything. So now we need to stop lying about ourselves and take advantage of the time that we're in. And stop floating. And stop moving off of the mountaintop and into our promised land. It was already prophesized. So we are going to get there. And we're all going to get there together. Great Grand Rising, everyone. This is our new Thunder for Dark Matter Radio presentations. We appreciate you being here, listening to the second part of structural violence and the carnage that is taking place in this war that's still going on. And we are glad to be able to be here in assistance to be able to help put your community back together again. So please subscribe, like, share the video, and also visit www.i-m-indigenous.org. Buy that book, Believe. All of the proceeds from there, or 100% of those proceeds from there, will go into providing help for all the communities that we're trying to reestablish and going into formulating Congress. Visit African Americans and Africans and any other platform that is out there that is actually trying to help and raise the consciousness of people. We're all in this together. There is nothing about the one. It's about the all. And if one can't make it, we got to surround that person, pick them up, and make sure that they do. Peace, guys. Love you. Great Grand Rising. And there you have it. A new Thunder. Head of State of the Indigenous Nations of North America. Proud to be. I am.